Conservation Commission. And this program is being sponsored by not just the Richford Conservation Commission, but the Enosburg Conservation Commission and the Montgomery Conservation Commission. So we like to do things jointly, and we're happy to do this. We all thought this was a perfect time of year to talk about reptiles and amphibians, and I've heard Jim speak before, and I think you're in for a treat. So I'm just going to read a little bit of his biography so you will know a little bit about Jim and his credentials. He graduated from UVM with a BS in Environmental Studies and later received his master's degree in biology from Middlebury College. He has been working full-time as a herpetologist, wildlife biologist in Vermont since 1990. He has worked closely with state, federal, and private agencies and individuals on herptile conservation throughout Vermont. He currently serves as chair of the Reptile and Amphibian Scientific Advisory Group to the Vermont Endangered Species Committee. He also coordinates the Vermont Reptile and Amphibian Atlas and serves as a research and teaching associate with Vermont Family Forests in Bristol, Vermont. In addition, he teaches courses on Vermont reptiles, amphibians, trees, and birds at a variety of institutions. He also runs herpetological research and education projects and provides independent consulting and herpetological surveys. Jim is a founding member of the Salisbury Conservation Commission and has been a compiler and organizer of the Middlebury Christmas bird count since its inception. In addition, Jim has been working with the Vermont Agency of Transportation to help minimize the impacts of transportation infrastructure and traffic on wildlife. Conservation of Vermont's wildlife and wildlife habitat through education, field experience, and science is a common theme running through all his activities. So these three conservation commissions are very happy to present to you tonight, Mr. Jim Andrews. So we're looking forward to your talk, Jim.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you.
Welcome.
I see that most people have muted themselves. That's great. That's real helpful. I think as we proceed and I start the talk, if you do want to ask a question, feel free. I mean, just unmute yourself and make yourself visible, and wave your hand and make some noise, and we'd be happy to answer questions as we go along. I'm going to share my screen. And jump right into it. I'm going to focus on a select group of reptiles and amphibians from up in the eastern portion of Franklin County, where I know many of you are from. And I want to start with this particular map here to show you the diversity of reptiles and amphibians as we know it in Vermont. And if you look down here in western Rutland County, this is where we have our greatest diversity, primarily because of the number of southern reptile species that are at the northern extent of their range. This is one of the warmest little corners that we have in the state. And down here compares, as you get down in the Brattleboro area, it has pretty good diversity and is fairly warm, but just doesn't have the diversity that you see up here in western Rutland County. And then the Champlain Basin, fairly moderate climate, plus all the big marshes and Lake Champlain, has pretty good diversity along the edge of the lake. But as we come in here to eastern Franklin County, you can see that we have less diversity of species, colder and without the lake, because there's some specific species out there like spiny softshell turtle or mud puppy or map turtle that we're just not going to see as we move inland. And so you guys are here or many of you that are from this area are in this transition area where we're coming out of the Lake Champlain Basin and we're headed up into some hills, and it's just getting colder as the climate in general is getting colder. And so there are actually a number of species in this area that are right at the edge of their range, and a number of others that are right at the edge of our known range, and we need to learn more about. I want to start with a really common, one of the most common amphibians that we have, the green frog. And I'll tell you a little bit about the green frog first. First of all, there are three frogs that have this green face, as I call it, three green-faced frogs that you can see up in that area. This one, the green frog, the bullfrog, and then the rare northerner, the mink frog. And what we want to look for here is this ridge right down the edge of the back, this fold of skin that stands up. That's the dorsolateral ridge, and bullfrogs don't have that. And many people confuse bullfrogs with green frogs. When they see a big green frog, they get the two confused. I'll point out that if you look here, you see this great big huge eardrum. That's the tympanum. And when it's this size, like twice the size of the eye, that tells you that's a male. And if this was about the same size or a little bit larger than the eye, that would be a female. So this is a large male green frog. And take a look at the map over here, and you'll see that all these gray towns are towns where we have records of green frogs. So we've got green frog records from every single town in Vermont. And then you look for the dots, and the dots are telling you that we have either a photographic voucher, or we have maybe a video or tape recording, so that we have some proof that what people have been reporting to us is actually what they say it is. And so we've got great information there, but we've been collecting data now for over 25 years. And what that means is that some of the data that we originally collected 25 years ago drops into the category that we call historic records. And if they haven't been reported in the last 25 years, we need to get new reports. We need to update the reports. And so I mentioned down here that in Montgomery, here, the record for green frog will become historic in 2023. So it should be fairly easy for somebody to go out to the edge of their pond in Montgomery or somebody else's pond, take a picture of a green frog so that we have that updated, and we won't have to show it as a historic record from Montgomery. We are always updating the records, and we try to make sure that we have records that are, no more than, say, 5 years old, but they're becoming historic in a couple towns. I want to point this one out too. This is the wood frog, and this time of the year is the easiest time to see the wood frogs. They'll be moving tonight across roads. Some of them have already moved to their breeding ponds, and tonight they'll be moving back. Notice again, dorsolateral ridges, black mask, extending a little bit here up to the nostril. And this is a very terrestrial frog, and it's unusual in the sense that it's one of only 4 species that we have that can freeze and thaw. They're freeze tolerant. Now, that's not that the cells themselves can freeze. It's the fluids between the cells that can freeze. But if you were to pick it up, it would feel frozen, and its heart would not be beating, and its lungs would not be pulling in oxygen. It would be in a state of essentially suspended animation. But their antifreeze is only so good. The antifreeze in their cells is only so good. So if the temperature gets where they're hiding, right in the leaf litter, gets low enough, it might actually freeze the cells. And if that happens, the cells expand just like a milk bottle would in your refrigerator or a Coke can or whatever. They expand, and the cell's going to break, and so they're going to have cellular damage, and they might be able to withstand a little bit of that. But if it gets too cold and they have too much cellular damage, they're going to die. And so one of our concerns with climate change is that we might occasionally lose the insulating layer of snow that we have. And when we lose that snow, the frogs that are hiding in the leaf litter are going to get much colder. If we have a layer of snow, excuse me, the ground might not even freeze because it's a good insulator. Now, it says right here, and we're taking a look up here, Berkshire. Need a report and photo from Berkshire. We've had reports, but looks like we need some documentation. Recently, Kate Kelly filled in both Fairfield and Highgate and got recent photos from here and here so that we could fill in those gaps, put dots in those particular towns. So here's a wood frog that we uncovered in the early spring, and this is where it spent the winter, just to give you an idea that it's not particularly deep in the soil, these guys. There are things like spotted salamanders, which are not freeze tolerant, and they have to get down below the frost line. But the wood frog and the gray tree frog and the boreal coarse frog and the spring peeper can hide just in the really shallow duff like this. Usually they would be covered, though we have uncovered this one. And then as soon as they get warmed up in the spring, heart starts beating again, lungs start moving again, and they start moving to the nearest breeding pool, probably where they're hearing all their fellow males making a lot of quacking noises. The wood frog, by the way, is the one that is the earliest to make noise in the spring, the first to call before you would even hear the spring peepers. Though it doesn't carry as much, it's kind of a clucking or a quacking noise that you may have heard. I'm going to switch over here now to another one of the green-faced frogs, green face, but notice no dorsolateral ridge here. It does have a ridge that comes around behind the tympanum, but green frogs and other frogs have that too. But the lack of a ridge here is what's important to us. And now let's look at one other characteristic. Green frogs and bullfrogs have striped legs. And when their legs are folded like this, bent up, those stripes you can see going across both portions of the leg. So green and bull, striped legs, but not so on the rare northern mink frog, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. Bullfrogs, green frogs overwinter in water. And so it might be under a rock in a slow stream, or it might be in a kind of a spring area on the bottom of a pond. Generally, these guys are not are not deep in the muck because it would be hard for them to get oxygen through their skin when they're deep in the muck. Usually they're just tucked in under something and that something gives them a little protection from predators at the bottom of a pond, but not really scurried down in the muck. The muck is handy to have when you're trying to get away from a fish or trying to get away from an otter or a heron. But you don't really want to stay down there. You want to come up so that you can take some oxygen in through your skin. And if you think about that, these guys are spending about 7 months underwater. That's a pretty good feat, to spend that long with just taking oxygen through your skin. But if you remember that these guys are ectotherms or cold-blooded, their whole metabolism slows down as they cool, and they don't need very much oxygen. They don't need to burn fuel like we do to keep a body temperature up. Ounce for ounce, if you compared this, say, with a chipmunk, something warm-blooded about the same size, these guys use about 3% of the energy that a chipmunk would. So they're just way more efficient. They don't need as much oxygen as that chipmunk is going to need. And so they can live on the limited amount of oxygen that they take in through the water and through their skin for that long period of time. You'll see that as we get up into eastern Franklin County, we have no records ever of bullfrogs. And so it would be really cool if somebody knows of or hears bullfrogs. Now they haven't started calling yet. They call when it really gets warm. We usually don't hear bullfrogs until late May or maybe June. But were you to hear one and get a recording or see one and get a photo, you would be the first person ever to document a bullfrog from Montgomery or Richford. And we still need photos here from Berkshire and Fairfax. So it's not as abundant a frog. It does really well here. You can see in the Champlain Basin. But as you go up into the hills, they become harder and harder to find. A couple more bullfrog shots. This is a big male with the yellow throat. You see that on the male green frogs as well. Notice the big eardrum or tympanum here, more than twice the size of the eye. So this is a big male here. Okay, one of these is a bullfrog and one of these is a green frog. Take a look. They have a different shaped mouth. One of them looks like he's got kind of a dumb smile on his face. The other guy's got a little bit of a hook nose and more of a pointed snout. This is the green frog here, and you can see its dorsolateral ridges. The smiley dude is the bullfrog with that wide, rounded mouth. And if you can see his back, you'd see that he did not have dorsolateral ridges, but they can be hard to tell apart, but the mouth is different. And of course, they don't have the ridges. There's two kinds of frogs here that you're looking at as well. Take a second to look at them. We see stripes here, and that's really important. The stripes are telling us that it's either a green frog or a bullfrog, but we see ridges. And so the only one of these green-faced frogs that has the stripes and the ridges is the green frog. Over here, you see another green-faced frog, and he has ridges, but he doesn't have stripes down here. He has oval spots that are oriented along the axis of the leg. No stripes going across. Now, were you to grab this frog, it would smell, your hands would smell like garlic, or maybe you've been cutting onions. They have a defensive odor. I don't find it offensive, but you'd smell it on your hands. And if you didn't smell it, you could kind of scratch the frog a little bit. I sometimes refer to them as the scratch and sniff frog. And then he'll release a little bit of that scent, and you'd be able to smell that odor. So this is mink. This is green, and we've shown you bull. Now take a look at the distribution here of the mink. This is really a Canadian frog that just makes it down into the coldest corner of Vermont. But we have records from the Fairfield Swamp. We have records from just to the east of Franklin County. And coming down here, right on the edge of the Green Mountains, we have some records. So it's entirely possible that this frog that so far has not been reported from this whole area could well be there. Where would it be? Well, it likes cold water. If it's in the same pond as the green frogs and the bullfrogs, it'll probably stay in the inlets and the outlets rather than right in the main body of water, or maybe in some of the shallow bays that have lots of emergent vegetation. Keep that in mind for all of these green-faced frogs. They like emergent vegetation. If you have some pond on your property and you don't allow any vegetation to grow in it, then you're not going to have as much wildlife in there. If you got a corner that has cattails and who knows, other emergent sedges that are coming up through, that's what the wildlife like. That's what the amphibians like. I once had a fella ask me why there were no peepers in his new pond, and his new pond was sterile. He mowed right up to the edge of it. There was no natural habitat around the edge of it, and there was no emergent vegetation in it. You want to have some natural vegetation on the shoreline and at least in some part of the pond if you want to support amphibians. Also, don't add fish and you'll have more amphibians because many of the fish are predators on the amphibians. So it would be really cool if some of you people could find populations of mink frogs up in this area. They'd be the first ever. Of course, there's holes in our distribution down here as well. And you can see some of these are becoming historic records. And it may well be that this is a climate change deal, where as it becomes too warm, we may see this population disappear from the corner of Vermont. But I want to keep an eye on it and see what happens to it. I think this is a particularly handsome frog. This is the pickerel frog. And there are two frogs that are very, very clearly, prominently spotted like this. The pickerel and the leopard. And the leopard is primarily a lowland species, Champlain Valley, big marshes, along the edges of the big rivers where it floods. And the pickerel is more of an upland species that likes, say, beaver ponds and beaver meadows up in the hills. And they like nice, cold, clean mountain water. This guy's call is a short snore. I haven't heard that short snore yet this year, but I've probably been spending too much time in front of the computer because I suspect it's probably started calling in some areas. But notice the spots. This guy, brown background, and the spots are kind of rectangular. Now you've got to be a little loose in your definition, but kind of rectangular. They come right over and touch the dorsolateral ridges. There's no space between these spots and the ridges, and they're usually organized into rows. And when you can see it, and we can see it here, they have yellow around their waist and on the underside of their legs. And that yellow is a giveaway that it has to be a pickerel frog. And it makes some sense because the yellow probably advertises a certain amount of toxicity. And I'm not talking toxicity in terms of a problem with you handling it, but I would say don't lick it. Not that I'm worried about you licking it, but maybe keep your tongue away from this frog. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing some towns where it's never been reported. We're seeing some towns where it's been reported but not documented with a photograph or a tape recording, and places where we need updated reports. Highgate, Montgomery, Swanton. Here's the underside of that pickerel frog. So you can see the yellow on the underside of the legs. The yellow, what I call a waistcoat or vest. Some yellow on the underside of these legs as well. Pickerel. As opposed to leopard. So here's the leopard. And the leopard could have a green background or it could have a brown background, a golden like this. It could have either color. So whereas the pickerel is always brown in the background, the leopard can vary. But look at the spots. The spots are rounded and they're highlighted or outlined in this really light color. In this case, it looks light green around each of the spots. They're not squared. You can see that there's space between the spots and the ridges here. That's another good characteristic of leopard frogs. And they're randomly organized. They're not organized into very, very neat rows. They're haphazardly placed. And this is really a species, if you look at the map, of the Lake Champlain Basin. And you can see that. So here's the question. Do they extend up into eastern Franklin County and actually I should say into western, what's the next county over? I'm forgetting the name of it.
Orleans, I think.
Orleans, yeah.
Orleans.
Over into Orleans. So it looks like it kind of disappears there. We're getting away from some of the floodplains. Anybody have any questions so far? Yeah, Ben?
Oh, I've got some video from Enosburg of northern leopard frog. I'll send it to you from the Trout River.
That would be great. And if you
Yeah,
could,
yeah.
along with the video, give me like a date and as good a location as you can.
Sure.
And
Cool.
we can make a record out of that. All right. So here's more leopards. These leopards have the green background instead of the golden background. Very prominent ridges here, the dorsolateral ridges. Look at, they even have some tiny ridges. You don't always see this, but they even have some tiny ridges in between these two big ones. White on the underside instead of yellow. Good field mark. Where you have populations of northern leopard frogs, they can just be tremendously abundant. They have an unusual life cycle in that they overwinter in the water, you know, not on the ground like the peepers or the wood frogs. So they overwinter in the water. And in some cases, we've seen them hiding under turtles, tucked in underneath the turtles and just using the turtles for some cover. And then in the spring, they come to the surface, come to the shore, and go to the flooded lands along the edge of the river or flooded areas along the edge of the lake. And they call, and they have a really neat two-part call that I'm not going to be able to describe it to you, but you may be interested in hearing it either on our website or other locations online. But I've described it as sounding like the sound of the alien monster in Predator. It's an interesting call, and they are calling now on sunny days. Matt and I have heard a lot of these guys just recently, and they have been depositing their eggs for the last couple of weeks. So then they come into the floodplains, lay their eggs, the young hatch there, go through the tadpole stage, and then by late July, maybe August, they metamorphose into their terrestrial form, and then they feed in grasslands or sedges, or sometimes cattail areas, or pastures. So they need three habitats together. They need a body of water that doesn't freeze, where they spend the winter. They need something that floods, so they'll have a place to breed. And then they need grasslands nearby. And the Champlain Basin supplies all three of those pretty nicely. So here's a little mental quiz for you. What are you looking at here? All three of these things are spotted. Okay, we got spots here. We got a brown background. We got spots here. We got a brown background. We got spots here with a green background. So this one, they're oriented. The spots are kind of squarish. They're organized into rows. So that makes it pickerel. Here we have one brown background. The spots are not organized into nice, neat rows. They're more rounded, and they've got these nice, clear halos around them. Leopard. Okay, green background on this one. Kind of irregular spots. And they look maybe like kind of like they're in rows, but then there's a couple of these in the middle. So that doesn't work. There's skin between these spots and this ridge. That's helpful here. That tells us leopard frog. Here, these spots went right up to the ridge. Here it didn't. Northern leopard, a brown face, and here pickerel. Now, of course, if you turned it over, this would be the only one that showed yellow under its legs. So if you're good enough to catch them, because these guys are good jumpers, and turn them over, then that's a useful clue in identification. Here's one of my favorite frogs. They're just so cute. They're bumpy like a toad, but unlike a toad, They have these adhesive pads which allow them to be excellent climbers. So they can climb up the outside of your house, they can climb up a window, peek in at you. They like, in general, they like warmer weather, and we haven't heard them talking very much, but a couple people have reported some gray tree frogs speaking during the middle of the day when it really started heating up there in the 70s. Notice that they have a pattern, and this pattern is described as lichenate. So like lichens on a rock or on a tree, and it's a good type of camouflage. But its scientific name down here, Hyla versicolor, gives you a clue that they can change color from green to white to gray and light green to dark green, some almost white. But this is consistent. It has a nice spot underneath its eye. Those big adhesive discs are consistent. And if we look for ridges, there are no ridges on this frog. It's just a rounded, kind of a plump looking back. Some people mistakenly refer to it as a tree toads, but it is the gray tree frog, even though it is not always gray. So here we're seeing never been reported from St. Albans City. Well, that could be tough. It's not a lot of habitat left right in the city. See, Franklin County was filled in just recently, for the town of Franklin, by Devin Batchelder. We need updated reports and photos from Montgomery and Richford. So they're going to become historic. We need some new photos of these guys. Great tree frogs do overwinter. They're freeze tolerant, so they could just be under a loose flap of bark. Some people have mentioned that they have found them in their gutters, rain gutters, when they were cleaning them out in the spring. They could be hiding in those leaves, or they could be in the soil or the leaf litter somewhere. But when it warms up, they head up into the trees and they feed on the insects in the trees, and they're there all of the active season, except for the few weeks when they come down in late May, maybe through June, on really hot, like 60 to 70 degree nights, humid nights, to go to the ponds and breed. Here they are showing their flash colors. They're called flash colors because ordinarily they don't show up, but when they jump or change position, you might see a flash of this bright yellow. And it also indicates, again, a certain level of toxicity in the skin, particularly if their skin has been irritated or if they've been injured. They'll be pumping out this toxin. And I have, on a couple of occasions, you would think I might have learned after one occasion, but I did not. I've learned that if you rub your eyes with this toxin on your hands, that your eyes will burn and run for about 45 minutes. They haven't done any damage to my eyes as far as I know, but if you handle these guys, I would recommend rinsing your hands off before you rub your eyes. What makes these guys a little bit tricky is that when they're really, really young, they are this solid emerald green color. And I've had people report what they called green tree frogs, when actually they were looking at it. We don't have green tree frogs. We have young gray tree frogs that are this bright green color when they're young. And it makes some sense because when they have just transformed from the tadpoles in the late summer, early fall, they're going to be feeding in the cattails and the sedges and all that stuff right around the edge of the pond. And so they're going to fit in better. They're going to hide better if they have this green color. They'll fit their background better. But still, even this little guy, notice the light spot underneath the eye. Notice the lack of ridges. Notice that it has these adhesive discs on its toes for climbing. All good field marks. This guy is, everybody, or not everybody, but many people in Vermont know its call. This is the spring peeper. And ounce for ounce, it makes more noise than any other frog. It's only about an inch or inch and a quarter long, but it can be heard, say, a half mile away when its little peeping noise is made. What people don't recognize as often is that in the fall, when they're in the woods, they will also make a partial peep. And this drives some bird watchers crazy because they're trying to figure out what's making that little noise in the woods, and they may be trying to track it down. And they're very, very hard to track down because they're hiding under some leaves and they're getting ready for winter. But they may call on warm days in the fall. This guy is another freeze-tolerant species. Notice it doesn't have a dorsolateral ridge. It does have some adhesive discs, so it can climb okay. It's not a great climber like the gray tree frog, and it doesn't go way up in trees, but it can climb up in the grasses and the sedges and the cattails. And do notice that it has black that comes from the nostril right through the eye in a very similar way to the wood frog. So people can confuse little wood frogs with spring peepers. But remember, wood frogs have a ridge here. Wood frogs do not have this X on their back. And you should be able to tell them apart with a little work. Never been reported from Belvedere. Shame on Belvedere. There are clearly spring peepers in Belvedere. And if somebody could just go over there next week on a warm day and make a recording or a video of spring peepers calling from somewhere in Belvedere, we can fill in that gap. We've got to update reports from Highgate. That should be pretty easy. Oh, it looks like Matt just recently filled in one of these, Franklin. Let's see. And Liza Morse just recently filled in Montgomery. Good for her. But you can see that we still need additional reports to fill in our maps, and you could really help us out there. Here's a creature often found around homes, American toad. It's not unusual that it might hide under a front step or under your shed or under your back porch, and they're diggers, so they just dig into the soil a little bit during the day, but then at night, on rainy nights, they come out and feed. And some of them sometimes feed under your outdoor lights because they're attracting the insects. But sadly, they often go out in the middle of roads and feed. And so I often find myself on a warm, rainy night, driving like a drunkard, trying to get around all the toads that are out there trying to grab some worms, etc., in the middle of the road. Obviously, roads are a real hazard to these guys. It looks like we have pretty good records from your area of the American toads, but we need an updated photo from Montgomery by 2023. So we need to update the Montgomery record here within the next couple of years. This one, particular toad, showing really the diversity of colors, and it's fairly big, is a female. The females are the bigger ones. The males are more solid colored and a little bit smaller. And these guys have to dig deep enough. They can't freeze. They're not freeze tolerant. So they have to dig deep enough or hope for enough insulating snow so they don't freeze over the winter. The newt, which, is a salamander that most people recognize and most people are familiar with because they can be found, adult newts can be found in the edges of a pond, once again, where that emergent vegetation is, all summer, all spring, summer, and fall. And they'll actually spend the winter there too, if the pond is deep enough so that they won't freeze and and die as a result of that. But as we get up into the northeast corner here, newts become harder to find. And so we don't have right now and never have had a newt record from Richford, from Jay, from St. Albans City, once again in the city, less habitat, or Westfield. And we need another updated photo from Montgomery fairly soon. And it would be great if you could help us fill in some of these records in that area. Now, the newt, many of you guys know the newt in its terrestrial stage. And in its terrestrial stage, it's called a red eft. It's still a newt, but it's the red eft stage of the newt. And these guys move around as long as the grass and the soil is moist, so that they won't dry out. Now, keep in mind that all amphibians can dry out and die within a matter of hours if their skin isn't moist. And so that's why these guys are going to disappear as soon as the grass in the ground dies. They're going to hide. They're going to go undercover in order to stay moist. But when the ground's still moist, you could see lots of these guys running around on the surface in the areas, say, of a beaver pond. They have essentially co-evolved with beaver ponds. The adults live in the pond all year long, but their young, these Fs, are terrestrial. And so they're wandering around, maybe going upstream, maybe going downstream, maybe going over the hill, which is good, because when the beavers eventually leave those ponds and they don't keep the dam up, the dam's going to wash out in some high water event. The newts are no longer going to be able to live there. And the beavers might move upstream or downstream or over the hill themselves. And hopefully the red Fs are there so that when they get older, they'll move into the new beaver pond and colonize the new beaver pond. Now, although we take this creature for granted in much of Vermont, or at least we consider it fairly common, in places that have been highly developed, like Rhode Island, it is difficult to find eastern newts. I talked to a biologist colleague of mine in Rhode Island years ago, and he made an important statement that we should all keep in mind. He said that within 20 years, Rhode Island will be entirely built out. In other words, what he meant was, at the rate they were developing land, all non-conserved land in Rhode Island would have been built on in 20 years. Now, we should be thinking about that when we're talking about planning in Vermont. If we want Vermont to look like Rhode Island, then we can do that, but we're going to lose our wildlife and we're going to lose most of our working ecosystems and life support system. So we've got to be figuring out how to conserve as much land as possible in order to keep wildlife and working ecosystems here and keep our life support system working. Going to move you to another habitat type and start thinking about a little something else. Nice little rocky stream. Lots of pieces of cover here where amphibians could be hiding under rocks along the edge of a stream. There are 3 species of salamander and actually a couple frogs, which might well be hiding under these rocks along the edge of a stream. And this is just a fun activity, I think, in the late spring and summer and early fall, is moving along the edge of these streams and turning cover to find the amphibians that are living in this sort of habitat. Probably the most common amphibian that you're going to find hiding under those rocks is this little skinny salamander here, called, nicely enough, the 2-lined salamander. And indeed, it has these 2 black lines. This particular 2-lined is the northern 2-lined. That's the one that we have. And were you able to turn it over, now this is not easy because they're going to be squiggling around in your hands, but you would see this bright yellow underneath the tail and around the waist, which suggests some toxicity, but I've never read about that in any journal, and I've never seen it measured. So 2-lined salamander, long, 3 or 4 inches long, yellow underneath, along the edges of the stream. So when it rains, because it's wet, they can leave the stream and go up into the woods and feed on the ferns, etc. And they might go a couple hundred feet and they may stay there as long as it's wet, but when it starts drying out, they're going to go back to the stream. So right now, the two-line salamanders are leaving the streams tonight, going out to feed, and they're gradually going to work their way back as things start drying out. Let's see here. We have never had a report of a two-line salamander from Highgate, and Kate Kelly filled in Sheldon back in 2019. Highgate. So the question would be, this challenge would be to find a nice little rocky stream in Highgate. And if you can find that rocky stream, you ought to be able to find that salamander. Now there's another salamander that's much, much bigger. This is the size of a spotted salamander, maybe 7 or 8 inches long, big, chunky, slippery, fast, difficult to get your hands on, but not so hard to get a picture of. If you just turn the rock, take the picture first, and then maybe try to catch it afterwards. But once you try to catch it, most likely they're going to get away from you. This is the spring salamander, and it eats the smaller salamanders, and it eats worms, and it eats all those small bug larvae that are living on the edge of the stream. And this is really a mountain stream, cold water stream species. So look at this map. You can see that these guys are following the mountains right down the center of the state. They want the mountain streams, the large permanent streams that have a large drainage that never dry out. So we've never found this from anywhere in Grand Isle, and probably never will. Just don't have the streams. But as we start moving in from the Champlain Basin, maybe there's some good rocky trout type streams in some of these towns along the edge of the mountains that we haven't yet surveyed. And it would be really interesting to find some spring salamanders in that habitat. Here's a nice adult. Notice how big that is. Here's another stream salamander. This is the dusky, the northern dusky. It has some kind of subtle field marks. Notice that behind the eye to the corner of the jaw, there's a line, white line, kind of outlined in black. It has larger hind legs, thick, larger, and they're jumpers. They can jump. Hind legs, then front legs. And it's about the size, although you can't tell here, it's about the same size as an adult newt. As they get older, they get darker. And so you've got to be looking for this leg size, the relative leg size, and this marking, if you can still see it. And we can see here that we have, once again, we're missing entirely, never reported from Berkshire, never from St. Albans City, but again, St. Albans City doesn't have much of that habitat. Here is the northern dusky when it gets older, pretty dark, but it still has the large hind legs. And here's its specific habitat. Now you do find it along edges of streams, but along the edges of streams where you have these springs and seeps coming into those streams. So here, 3 of us are searching this kind of mucky seep, and it's ideal, the kind of places that you would walk through and you sink up to your ankle in your boots. And maybe you're worried about losing your boots when you pull your foot out. That kind of habitat, that kind of mucky organic habitat with rocks and trees and lots of moss around and some cover that you can turn, that's where you find the northern duskies. Let me hesitate for a minute here to see if anybody has any questions before we start talking reptile. Are there any questions out there? And if there are, just make yourself visible and speak up. Hearing none right now. I'm showing this cute little young lady to shame those of you who have this innate fear of snakes. You live in Vermont, you live in the North Country, and you live in the North. If you're one of the Franklin County people, there are no venomous snakes in your area. If it's a snake, you can pick it up. You are safe. It's not going to hurt you. This thing can do about as much damage to you as the roses or the raspberries that you walk through. Its teeth are sharp, yeah, but they're really, really short, maybe a millimeter or two, maybe the thickness of a dime. A little snake, like under 2 feet, couldn't even break your skin if it were to bite. A bigger snake, maybe 3 feet going up, okay, maybe it can break your skin, but it's not going to do any more damage than that raspberry bush that you planted there so you could pick raspberries. The fear of snakes that some people have is way out of proportion to the danger that they pose. And I'm showing you this young lady here because you can teach kids that it is safe to handle snakes, and you can teach them how to handle snakes, and they won't develop the fear. I think most of the people that really have a strong fear, somebody played with that fear. Somebody came after you with a snake, or somebody chased you, or I don't know, maybe they stuck one in a car seat sometime, and you built that fear up more and more over the years. But you can bring that down. You can, if you have somebody with you that is afraid, then the first thing you want to do, first you got to show them how to catch a snake, which is just to pin it to the ground gently. Don't worry about the head, the tail, whatever. Just pin it to the ground gently, whatever part of the snake you can pin. Don't push too hard, just enough to keep it from moving. And then scoop it and let it move through your hands. Don't constrict it. Just let it move through your hands, and it will calm down. And when it calms down, this friend of yours that's afraid of snakes will look at it and go, huh, how could I be afraid of that? And then ask them if they'll touch it. Step one. So they may reach out and touch it. And that may be as far as they want to go. And remember, never push them past their comfort level. Once they've touched it, you hand it to the young lady and she's playing with it. And in a minute, they start feeling embarrassed that they won't handle it because this young lady is handling it. And so they say, all right, I'll hold it. But you got to be right there. Because their nerve is only going to last so long. And when it starts moving, they're going to start getting nervous. So you got to be right there and catch it again. And then eventually they'll come around so that some of that fear will be lost, at least while you're there. And you can make some real progress. You can teach the young people that you work with to not be afraid of these snakes. And you can do a pretty good job even on the old people. Some basics about snakes. If you look closely at a snake and you look at the center of a scale, some of them have ridges. These are ridges like the keel on a canoe, and they stick up, and it makes the snake feel rough. And we want to keep this in mind because it's going to help us identify our snakes, whether they have keeled scales, slightly keeled, heavily keeled, they feel really rough, or whether they are smooth like this. These guys feel like leather, and they are not wet, nor are they slimy. If you grab an eel or a fish, or other fish, I should say, okay, they may be slimy, but snakes are not slimy, nor are snakes wet unless you just poured water on them. Here is a fairly common snake in most of Vermont. This is an older one, so it's fairly dark. This is the milk snake, the eastern milk snake, and a great field mark for the eastern milk snake is this white Y on the back of the head, a really nice clear white Y. And then they have these blotches that are outlined in a darker color. They have smooth scales, so they feel absolutely smooth. And our smooth scaled snakes lay eggs rather than give live birth. A garter snake, which has keels, gives live birth. This does not. It lays eggs, and I think that is part of the limiting factor as to how far north and east these creatures can make it. So notice the whole northeastern corner of the state has no reports except here. Now, I don't know what happened in this particular town, but remember, we move things around. We move hay bales around, we move mulch around, we move wood around, and maybe this snake got moved in somehow, or maybe its great granddaddy got moved in somehow and it survived for a while. But for the most part, missing entirely from the northeast corner of the state, and you guys are right on the edge of its known distribution and could give us some good information about whether or not this species is starting to move as the climate warms further north and east. This is a youngster, a young milk snake, and notice how much more colorful this is. Bright red and almost a silvery background, very, very bright. Now, many snakes can shake their tails. This guy shakes his tail a lot. And 100% of the reports of rattlesnakes that we get outside of Western Rutland County end up being milk snakes, these guys, because they can rattle. And so people hear a rattle or see something rattling and they think it is a rattlesnake. But if you're outside of Western Rutland County, it isn't. And if it doesn't actually have a rattle rather than just shaking its tail, if it doesn't have a rattle, it's not a rattlesnake. If you go to Western Rutland County and a snake has a rattle, okay, don't pick it up. But up where you guys are, take a look. This is kind of cool because at first glance, you think it's the same map. And then you realize, okay, here's the milk snake map. And here is a plant hardiness zone map. And it's showing you zones 3B and 4A and the edge. And that edge is almost identical to where we find, even with this little peninsula here, to where we find the milk snakes. So as this hardiness zone changes and this becomes warmer, we would expect the snakes to start moving up into that area. This is a small snake and it's really widespread. It gives live birth, and live birth is an advantage in a cold area. So small snake, maybe 8-10 inches long most of the time. Record would be 14 inches long. But if you look at the distribution map, it certainly lives up in the mountains. No question about that. Brown, black, or even a tan background. But here's some subtle markings right here in the neck. 3 little light spots. And those 3 little light spots tell us that it is a red-bellied snake. As its name implies, if you turn it over, it is going to be red on the belly. Never reported from Sable, Albany City. Okay, not surprising. May not have the habitat. We need a photo from Franklin. These are red-bellied snakes as well. Notice that it looks a little bit striped. A darker one, a lighter one, and the belly. One of the ways you can kind of promote tolerance of red-bellieds and brown snakes is that they're big snail and slug eaters. So they're handy to have around for controlling the populations of those guys, if say in your garden or around your yard. They are specialists. And actually it's kind of interesting because they could catch a snail when the soft part of the snail is out, grab it, and then they move and they wedge the body of the snail into some crevice, and then they spin. And they twist out the soft part of the snail and eat it. Of course, now that we've introduced worms to Vermont, all of our worms, 19 species, are introduced. They are feeding on the worms as well. This looks very, very similar, but look at its distribution. This is a Champlain Basin species that never has been reported up in the eastern corner of Franklin County. This is Decay's brown snake. It kind of looks like it has a stripe here down the center of the back, like a garter snake, but it's wider. And it has kind of a checkerboard pattern on sides, has a black spot on top of its head, It has black spots on either side of its neck, black sideburns, and black underneath the eye. Here's these subtle marks on the head. Black head, black sideburns, black under the eye, black here on the neck, but not a red belly. It looks a lot like a red belly, but no red belly there. Another slug worm snail specialist gives live birth. And where it's cold, remember, the advantage to live birth is that you don't just lay your eggs somewhere to be incubated by the heat of the sun, that mama can move her body along with the sun so that the sun can actually incubate those young inside her body, and she'll just follow the sun around in order to keep those young warm and the young developing. When brown snakes are really young, see this? They still have the black head, they still have the black sideburns, still have black under the eye, but the rest of this is white. But that disappears as they age. Ringneck snake, look at this row right up here, right along the Canadian border, missing entirely, never been reported. Gray snake with yellow underneath, you cannot mistake this species. Yellow or orange around the neck, black on either side, nicely named so you can't forget it. Ring-necked snake. Smooth, which means it lays eggs, so maybe a little more limited in where it can actually survive based on the climate. In hand, not a very big snake, beautiful yellow on the underside. One defense that snakes do have that you may have experienced is that they can produce a smelly musk from their vent down here if they become anxious. Now, it's kind of a challenge for those of us that handle snakes a lot to keep them from getting anxious, keep them calm so they don't do that. But it is kind of a smelly, a badge of honor, a perfume of the herpetologist from the snake. And it washes off, but it does smell a little bit. One way to find snakes, other than turning natural cover, like boards and pieces of metal and old abandoned cars, looking under the hoods of old abandoned cars, that kind of stuff, is to actually put out cover, to put out artificial cover on some sunny area, places where snakes could hide, and then come along every once in a while and check and see what you got for snakes. This is a good way to do an inventory or monitor, and it's lots of fun and is a kind of a cool thing to do at schools where kids can get out and actually check on a regular basis to see what they have for snakes. Now, I make these covers out of slate because I live near a slate area, and these slates soak up the heat during the day. I use 2 of them, put a little divider in between, and then I come along occasionally and pull up this top slate and see who's hiding in there. It'd be good to check in the morning before they really get heated up and move out for the day. But you can check them at night, or you can check them early in the morning and see what you have in your area. Right here, we have a whole fistful of garter snakes and red-bellied snakes that were found under one of these covers. Let me mention a couple of turtles here. Painted turtle, nicely named, bright red, yellows here, all these nice colors, nicely named, painted. Pretty widespread in the state, but we're still missing records. Let's see, we need a photo from Richford, and they're basking on warm days now. So looking for a painted turtle is great birdwatcher activity because you got your binoculars with you. You just scan the edges of those ponds and marshes, and if you could, take a picture so that we can fill in some of these gaps. This one, by the way, is a male, and we could tell because its fingernails are so long in the front compared to the back. And the males use these fingernails in courtship, and they rub the necks of the females with their claws. It's the underside of a painted turtle, part we call the plastron. Here's a baby painted turtle. Unlike snapping turtles, painted turtles this far north hatch in the fall, but stay in the ground in their nests through the winter. They're all lined up in there facing up, but they don't come out until about this time of year or later the next spring. So painted turtles will be emerging, little baby painted turtles will be emerging about now through the next couple months. And you can see here where the egg yolk was attached that was providing the nutrition for this little turtle. Here's a bigger turtle, a snapping turtle. Notice there's no particular colors, no spots, no stripes. And that's one of the identifying features of this turtle. And snapping turtle, pretty widespread in Vermont, as you can see. But let's see, Montgomery was recently filled in by Charlotte Bill. Thank you, Charlotte Bill. But we've still got right across the border here. We've got a couple towns where we need to get some snapping turtle reports. The time to see snapping turtles really is in late May and early June, when all the females are heading on land to find a place that's open and easy digging to lay their eggs. And sometimes that's your garden, your vegetable garden, your flower garden, edge of your driveway, some sunny, open area without a lot of vegetation where they can dig and lay their eggs. Now, of the creatures we've been talking about, this is the one you got to be a little more careful about. They're not aggressive, but when mama is on land, she is defensive. And if you start playing with her, she has a very, very long neck. You should keep in mind that that neck is about as long as the shell. And they don't have any teeth, but they have essentially a beak that could give a pretty good bite. And so you don't want to get your hands near the front of these turtles. You can handle them like I am here, with your hands way back on the back toward the edge of the shell, or better still, by grabbing the hind legs, the base of the hind legs. Make sure that head is faced away from you. And of course, I expect all of you people to be helping turtles across the road when mama is looking for a place to lay her eggs, because they just can't, they don't know anything about handling traffic, and they're going to need your help. But remember to keep your hands away from the face. I see a question out there.
I feel like I've seen two different snapping turtles. Is there a different variety? The ones that I've seen have really elaborate stripes on the sides of their head.
If they have stripes,
or on the top, not stripes, but just patterns, really elaborate colored patterns. And it's definitely they're still underwater when I'm seeing them. So is this something that
would that be near Lake Champlain?
One of them was at Great Falls of the Missisquoi, and one of them was right here in Enosburg. And when they were down in the water in the creek. That's why I'm just, if there's some variation, because they definitely, I'll send you guys an email tomorrow, but they definitely have some kind of elaborate pattern on the side of their heads, which doesn't look like the picture you have here. But no. Then,
yeah. So if you see a pattern, if there's stripes at all, it is just not this turtle, or even a pattern, it's not this turtle.
Sure.
If you're over closer to the lake, and that's why I asked that, then it's a map turtle. And I'm not even showing you a map turtle because they're always either in the lake or in the bottoms of the big rivers going to the lake. But they don't make it upstream very far. But look at that.
Yeah, I'll send you the picture. You guys can, in the video, you can check it out. That I'm just interested to see that.
Yeah. We'd be interested in seeing those. We'll let you know what they are.
As in, do they change their colors or anything like that? Like if you're only observing them as you pick them up or outside of the water, would they have different, do they change inside of the water?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say so. We'll have to take a look at the videos. So here's a mama snapping turtle digging her nesting hole and laying her eggs. She is one of two species that have these round eggs. She and the spiny softshell turtle. And then I'm jumping to some more unusual species that anytime you see these things anywhere, we'd love to hear about it. But particularly, look here, up in your area, because as far as we know, you're just a little bit too cold up there in eastern Franklin County to have these guys. And this is a smooth green snake. There's no way that you can confuse this species with anything else. Smooth and solid green, just like its name implies. Very tame, very gentle, in open, grassy or sedgy areas, maybe in a power line or a pasture, those sorts of things. They don't, no snakes do well with lawnmowers or agricultural equipment. So that's why you often see them in pastures that don't get mowed or on power lines that don't get mowed. But if you're fortunate enough to find one of these really smooth green snakes, we would love to hear about it anytime you do, particularly up in your area. It's an egg layer, so once again, it might be limited by your climate. This kind of habitat where you have some grass, you have some rocky surfaces that would warm up on the edge of an old pasture, that's good habitat for them. The wood turtle, it's kind of you should think of it maybe as a trout stream, not brook trout, but brown or rainbow trout stream turtle. It overwinters in those streams and then it feeds on land. And it goes out maybe 1,000 feet from those streams, but always comes back and spends the winter in the stream. So stream valleys, trout stream valleys, is where the wood turtle is found. Black head, orange flesh, and then I think I'm going to show you the underside that has this very clear pattern of black squares or black rectangles on the edges of the belly. And let me point out on this particular one that this is concave. It's dented here, and that tells us that this is a male, and that gives the males a little bit more of an advantage when trying to mount a female and mate, to have that concave belly. But anytime anybody sees a wood turtle, we would love to get a picture of it. And you can see that once you start getting out in the valley or in a little bit of the lowlands up there in western Franklin County, it looks like it disappears entirely. But as you get up into the hills more where the trout streams are, you might find it. Feeds entirely on land, which puts it at risk from cars and equipment. Anytime anybody sees anywhere the endangered spotted turtle, black shell with yellow spots on it, we only know of 3 populations of this turtle in the state. One here in Addison County, and then a couple in the southern part of the state, but there's no reason that in a large wetland area or a fen area or a bog area that there couldn't be more of these. I spent a lot of time along with my crew, Matt and Kelly, Kate Kelly, up here in Missisquoi last year looking for them, but we did not find them. Certainly have plenty of habitat, but apparently don't have any spotted turtles. But still, could be further inland. Jefferson salamander. Anytime anybody finds this nice big brownish gray salamander on a night like tonight, crossing a road, this would be a big find from up in your area. We've never found them that far north. But anywhere this salamander is found, we'd like to hear about it. It's not a common salamander. It is acid sensitive, so it does prefer to be in areas that have well buffered soils. Blue spotted salamander, easy to recognize, black with blue spots. Definitely found down here near the lake and in the Champlain Basin. But as you start heading upstream, it seems to disappear. But there could well be populations up in your area. Four-toed is in your area. We know it is because of this record. but it's a tiny little salamander, only about 4 inches long. Most people would think it's the far more common red-backed salamander, but this salamander is different in a few ways. One, it has this mottled back, orange background with these black mottlings on it. Two, it looks like it's been carved into with an electric pencil or something. It's not smooth. It has kind of a rough texture. Three, it has a narrow spot at the base of the tail that I call the tear here spot. So this tail will disappear. If a predator grabs it by the tip of the tail, it will break off right here. The tail will keep moving for a matter of minutes. Even if the tail stops moving, if you touch it, it'll move again. It'll hold the attention of the predator. Salamander escapes and it can regrow its tail. It can regrow toes, it can regrow jaws, it can regrow eyes. It's a wonderful thing about salamanders, a mysterious thing. Anytime anybody found this little salamander, and it is crossing the road right now up in your area somewhere, where it's never been reported. The underside of the four-toed salamander is a great field mark. Bright white with black spots. Bright, shiny white with scattered black spots. No other salamander looks like that. Lays its eggs in places like this, under the moss, not in the water, under the moss. Here's a mama guarding her eggs. And many females may lay their eggs together, and the first mama will be the one to guard all the eggs. And then as they hatch, they drop into the water and go through the larval stage. There's four toads again, so you can get a good look at them. Tear here spot. They look like they're carved into. They're mottled. And the underside, bright white with black spots. So here's a whole list of reptiles and amphibians that anytime you see them, we would love to get a picture because they're all unusual species. And this list is available on our website, vermontherpatlas.org. Anytime, we'd love to get a report. For more common species, if you're wondering whether we really need a report, if you go to our website and you go to here, report priorities and data gaps, you go right here on our website, click in, and there'll be a list of the towns and what species we really need photos of from each town. And you can look at that for your town and figure out whether we need a report. If you don't know what you're looking at, just send us a picture. If you don't know whether or not we need the report, send us a picture. Just tell us when and where you took that picture. And there's a reporting form here, or you can just send a record directly to me through my email address. So back to a point, a couple conservation points that we really got to talk about. And that is that in Vermont, even in a rural state like Vermont, we consume land at the rate of about 75 square miles per decade. That's an area about the size of the greater Burlington area. And if we think that we can continue to do that, build on all that land, and at the same time have the same amount of forest resources and agricultural resources and hunting and fishing and working ecosystems, we're fooling ourselves. We're thinking that we can have our cake and eat it too. We have to conserve land. These pictures are pointing out the fact, once again, that roads are particularly dangerous for reptiles and amphibians. And as traffic increases in an area, more and more of these creatures die. This was a pregnant female garter snake, and these were the young. And when it got run over, the young were pushed out of her body. This kind of plastic mesh is also a real killer for snakes. This plastic netting is used sometimes for, say, blueberries or to protect trees or for erosion control matting. Snakes get caught in that. And there are types of matting that you can use that do not have this plastic mesh in it. Plastic mesh is just plain dangerous to snakes. So we're the landowners. One species, humans, out of all the species on this planet, one species has claimed all the land as theirs to own and manage. And so if these other creatures are going to survive, it's because we're going to give them a chance to do that. We're going to manage that land in a way that allows them to survive. So I'll finish with this slide with that cute little mama snapping turtle. Please report your sightings. So I will stop screen sharing and take any questions. That's the end of my presentation, but I'll take any questions that anybody has. If you want to speak up or show yourself, I'd love to chat with you. Annette, are you going to find some of those species for us?
Definitely. I'm excited to go out there. In fact, tonight would probably be a good night because it's been so dry and it's rainy out now, right?
It would be a great night. Just go on a fairly quiet road where you're not going to get run over.
Right.
You know, some quiet road near a wetland or near a pond or near a vernal pool. The ideal situation for you to find them is to walk a fairly quiet road that doesn't have a lot of traffic with a wetland on one side and woods on the other. And they'll be moving between the wetland and the woods. And the ideal is to have a good, strong flashlight, light colored clothing so that you don't get hit by a car, you know, or maybe something reflective, and make sure that you get off the road when the cars are coming. Don't risk your life to dive in front of a car and save a creature. But you should be able to find some of these things. Matt Gorton and I are going out right after this presentation to do a little nighttime road surveying. Ben.
I do have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
It was the eye that has the cool patterns on the snapping turtle. I went and looked at my pictures. I was delusional. You are correct. Sorry.
Yeah, it is. There is kind of an interesting pattern in the eye if you could get a good close look at it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I'm expecting some records from you, Ben.
I'll email you tomorrow morning.
Okay. Annette, you had a question.
I do. I just read that there's a concern for sea turtles and climate change, and that their eggs determine their sex depending on the temperature of the sand where they lay their eggs. And I'm just wondering if you have any concerns about soils. I mean, eventually here in Vermont for some of our turtles.
All of our turtles, with the exception of 2 of them, have temperature dependent sex determination. So there's a critical time period in the development of the egg where, depending on what the temperature is, they're going to come out male or female.
That's so weird.
And so as we mess with the climate and we change the temperature,
they're all going to come out. We're
going to change the sex ratio. And so, yes, that is a concern. There are 2 turtles that are genetically determined, male, female, has nothing to do with the temperature. That's the spiny soft shell and the wood turtle, but all the rest, the temperature is a critical factor. And so it is a concern.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions out there? I hope some of you go out and march around either tonight or tomorrow night, see what you can find. And take a picture, send us a picture.
Can you give us your email?
Sure. It's just J. Andrews, my name, first initial name, J. Andrews at, it's Vermont Herp Atlas. So it's VT HERP for herp, ATLAS, VermontHerpAtlas.org. And you can find that also on our website.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Annette, I guess
for the whole audience, because we have a lot of years of living in Eastern Franklin County amongst us. Has anybody ever seen an Eastern milk snake here?
I think I have in Montgomery. It looked like a baby, and it was right near the Trout River. And one thing that was different about it was that it seemed aggressive. You know, if you see a little baby garter snake, they just kind of run away. And this snake actually picked up its head and was like, you know, moving its head aggressively. And it was very small. And I have seen larger ones down in the Orwell, Vermont area.
Sure.
And so I recognized it right away.
Well, it would be, the ideal would be a photo, if you can see one sometime, or even an old photo, if somebody has an old photo from when they saw one. But even without that, a report of just what you saw and when you saw it without the photo, we'll still put that in the database, and it'll be kind of a placeholder until somebody actually comes up with a photo. So what you're telling us is still valuable even without the photo.
Okay. All right. Another interesting thing I saw at Belvedere Pond were massive, massive snapping turtles. They were so huge. And I don't know what they were doing, but they like just came right up out of the water. It was like they were smashing together and then they went down. And I felt like I was in Jurassic Park. I mean, that's how big they were.
Well, they could have been either fighting or mating. And it's a little hard to tell that apart with snapping turtles.
Right, I bet.
But it could have been either. Matt just put my email address up in the chat. If you didn't catch it before, you can look in the chat room there. My email address is there for you.
Okay, great.
But yeah, they look huge. First of all, the shell's big, and then the tail might be about as long as the shell, and it looks prehistoric. And then the neck could be about as long as the tail. So the whole thing looks like an alligator, you know, when it's out there. If you imagine that some of the very, very biggest ones we have are about 18 inches on the shell, you add another 16 and you add another 16, the whole turtle is going to look huge.
Yeah.
And they are big.
Well, yeah. Mostly what I saw was the shell.
Yeah.
And it was massive. I would say probably at least 18 inches.
Yeah.
It was really big. There were two of them.
Yeah. It's hard to tell whether they would be fighting or mating, but either, depending on the time of year and what was going on.
It didn't last long, whatever they were doing.
Yeah, okay. Probably was mating then.
Probably.
I just wanted to say, I saw an eastern milk snake on Mount Philo 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, Philo, just enough south and, rocky as it is, lots of sun. It's enough warmer so that you would expect them to survive there. Now we need you to find one. I don't know where you're from, Ken, but if you can find one in eastern Franklin County, that would be brand new info.
Yeah. I'm in Enosburg near Montgomery.
Well, you're up there.
Yeah.
If you found one in Enosburg, and sometimes they take advantage of places that generate heat, like a compost pile or a manure pile, or even a wall of a house. If it's a sunny south facing wall of a house that has maybe an old stone foundation below it. And they often use old barns and abandoned buildings, but think sun, think heat. The warmest, sunniest spots that you have could potentially turn up a milk snake, and that would be very exciting.
When I lived in Orwell, the time that I saw a milk snake there, I had a house with a stone foundation, and it was going into the foundation.
They will if a mouse can go through a hole, they'll follow it in. And they eat mice, among other things. They eat other snakes too. But it's not unusual. In fact, it's quite common for them to follow mice right into a stone foundation, or maybe up under the clapboards of a sunny side of a house. And I bet that was the sunny side of your house too.
I think so. And there was actually a pond right behind the house too.
Yeah.
It was like a perfect location for snakes.
Yeah. Now for the milk snake, they don't really care about the pond. Like
Yeah.
garter snakes and most of the others do, but milk snakes,
Mhm.
that doesn't matter to them all that much.
Mhm.
But when you were in Orwell, though, you were getting down into Snake Central. That was a good place to see quite a
I saw
variety
a
of snakes.
black rat snake one
Sure.
time that was humongous.
Yeah, could be 6 feet long.
Yeah, they're awful. to
Oh,
look
they're
at.
not
You don't want
awful.
to
They're
see them.
cool. They're cool. They're big and they're friendly. They may be intimidating at first, but you know, they're really quite tame.
My friend had one that lived in her horse barn, and it would
Yeah.
go up in the rafters and eat the eggs out of the bird's nest in there.
Oh yeah, that's typical. I mean, essentially
Yeah.
their habitat is hollow trees.
Hmm.
And if you think about what we have created, like the old barns and sheds, that's about as close as you can get to a hollow tree. And
Mm.
so in the hollow trees, they're feeding on birds' eggs,
Hmm.
maybe even young fledglings.
Hmm.
So in the barns, there's not only the mice and the rats, but there might be starlings, there might be house sparrows, there might be a host of other birds that might be nesting in there, and they love. It's a great food supply.
Hmm.
Anybody else? I'm hoping that some of you will go out there and find some cool things for us.
Definitely.
Just if you don't want to handle them, just take a picture.
Probably better to just take a picture, right, Jim? Handling them.
That's fine, but handling them is not. It could. I think handling is a good experience for people. It helps you bond, even if it bites you.
Right, and just the whole evening tonight is bonding with these wonderful creatures that we have here, and just our missions from all three conservation commissions is to highlight species that we have here in Eastern Franklin County and celebrate them. And the more people know about them, the more we'll want to conserve them. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And Jim, I am just in awe of all your expertise. It's a good reminder of just, it's the tip of the iceberg now. I want to know more and more and more. So thank you for getting us all excited about reptiles and amphibians and giving us this challenge of finding creatures that should be here. We just need to report them, and it's better to know what you have in order to conserve them. So all of you, please do report these reptiles and amphibians when you come across them. They'll help us know what we have here. So thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Jim, so much for a delightful evening.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Annette, and I expect to get some records over the coming field season and from now on.
Absolutely.
All righty. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.